What is up, party people? All right, so check this out. I'm not one to hang on. That's right, I was smoking. I'm not one to rehash. Yeah, actually, I am. So I'm not sure if you guys heard on Jose's uh, stream this morning. Had a nice conversation with Travis and Chris, and he irked the shit out of me, guys. Let me explain this to you. There are a few things that I can tolerate. I can tolerate a troll. I can tolerate denying science. I can tolerate misunderstandings. I can tolerate being dumb. What I do not tolerate is someone calling me a liar. So let me explain something, and I'm going to do this real nice, short, and sweet. Travis, whether you're listening or not, anyone here lets Travis know that this first part of my stream is dedicated especially to him and his bullshit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play what Travis said this morning so you guys can get a very good understanding of why I'm so triggered. Let me pull that up real quick. Let's see which one it is. One second. All right. Let me see what screen it comes on. All right, just listen up. My bad, guys. Let me start it over.
When I see comments like that, I don't even pay attention to them because they're not even honestly engaging. It would be really interesting to have finally someone show up and say, you know what, Travis, I'd love to go through your stuff and have a one-to-one conversation. No one's going to do that. I've been on your show and I've invited people left and right. Let's do live hangouts. No one's approached me to do that. No one's serious about that. So to me, that just shows a complete dishonesty in terms of wanting to approach the subject.
Did you get a few goals with a few like one-on-ones with Shonji or not?
Did I do what?
Did you talk with Shonji in his channel and this one a few times about your observations? Because he insists like he buried it and he destroyed each of them.
I know, right? But see, the last time I was on Sean G's, I believe was when I got triggered and rage quit. And what frustrated me about that was that they were taking one image, like Chris said, they chose one of my images, and they did the scale application where they tried to fit a stock image of the lighthouse and impose it on my footage. And I said, why don't you do that to the rest of the video? I have two different images that you can do that to, and they didn't do it. So right there, that's dishonest, right? It's like what Chris said. You go out one day, you take one image, and you go, look, this is curvature. And Chris says, why don't you go out another day? And they're like, nope, that's all I need. Just one picture, it shows it. That's a dishonest photographer. It's completely dishonest. So Sean G, I have no interest in talking to a dishonest person. And I said it to you on your show one of the last times I was on last week. I said, there's 2 more images. You deal with those 2 images and then we'll talk. And he was on last night saying, I destroyed your ether band. Everybody drink.
All right, so there you go. You heard that part. All right, so I'm going to go over what he said and why I'm so triggered. This is more fun than anything. He said that he couldn't find anyone to do a one-on-one and go over his video and images, which kind of goes along with bullshit because, hey, Travis, I'm not sure if you remember, buddy, but we did 4 episodes that we alone, me and you, and then at the last one, a few others went over this. I'm looking at right now a combined total of 17 hours to Travis. So you're full of shit, Travis. That's a little dishonest, don't you think? Then you said, and I quote, I gave them 2 pictures and they refused to do it. Travis, it was more than a few pictures that we showed exactly what we meant and how your ether band is dead. Now, Chris said something on Jose's, said maybe he means the way you explained. No. Travis's ether band is dead, people. Anytime he talks about it, just bow your heads and say, I'm sorry. That's basically what I wanted to show you guys. But then I'm going to go into what I know will really irk him. He likes to talk about people's character. He says he's honest. Our beloved friend Erebus, who mind you knows optics pretty well. I mean, in perspective, he's an artist. Came out and said, "Hey Travis, you're being dishonest about how you're doing your photos." And guess what Travis said? F this, F that, and he rage quit. That shows dishonesty, Travis. Now, luckily, I didn't have to really even touch into the topic to get to this, because that's just something I want to say. This is straight to you, Travis. This doesn't go to anyone else. Travis, you don't understand how dumb you are. I don't like disrespecting people, but at this point, you have shown that it's not even your fault. It's not like you're playing a game. It's not like you're scamming anybody. It's literally a world you think you live in that correlates with the images that you think you see and the words that come out of your mouth. But unfortunately, Travis, the world doesn't work that way, nor does evidence or proof or any other bullshit you think you have. Now, I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of flat earthers. I've talked to a lot of deniers. You name it, I've talked to every side of every book. Now, understand this. Chris Berry, I've had many of conversations with him. I've even called him out on his shit. And Travis, understand something. Whether Chris is pushing to try to get a narrative going or pushing to make things different than reality shows, he at least went back every time and redid his shit to be more honest. You could never do that. Why? Because you don't even understand what you're looking at in your photos. I get it now. The ether band to you, Travis, explains everything because you don't understand anything. If you don't understand refraction, climate, optics, and everything that goes in the in-between, of course you're going to call it something. You're going to call it one thing and stick to it. But your one thing that you stick to doesn't explain shit. It doesn't even explain the observation you're making, because when you say it to somebody, you have to explain with word salad atmospheric conditions. It's pathetic. Everyone knows it. Even your side of the argument knows it. They just say ether band because they know it triggers people. Now, the ether band doesn't really trigger me. It's just the fact that, Travis, I thought there were really dishonest people like Bro Sanchez, they're scammers. Nathan, scammer. Red's Rhetoric, Fight the Fighter, they're all there for money. They're assholes for it. But you're just dishonest on the dumb scale. I suggest that you never in your life bring my name up in a disrespectful tone again, Travis. Because then I'll just follow you around everywhere and repeat what I'm saying right now, everywhere you are, until it sinks the fuck in. I'm sorry your coffee corner didn't work. Yeah, it's a responsibility to get up every morning and actually try. I know you thought disrespecting people that were really there to help you would bring people in, but it just made you look stupid. And those are the things you need to remember. Because, again, this isn't just internet bullshit to me. How I act right here, what you guys hear, how you interpret anything I say, or how I act and carry myself is how I am in person. And Travis, I am the type of person that will remember the disrespect. So if I were you, again, keep my name out your mouth in a disrespectful tone. When you're ready to actually be a grown adult, you can come on over and explain to me how my complete annihilation of the ether ban, and explaining to you how we came to that conclusion through multiple means, whether it be perspective, refraction, curvature, how the obstruction in the mirages were affecting the situation. I've gone through every situation. I went 2 weeks with you, Travis. 2 weeks being respectful, explaining to you, and you agreed to everything we said. And I did this on purpose, and I even told you that. You can go back and listen. I said I was going to be respectful about it. I was going to explain to you in the best clear possible way to make sure that our observations linked up, that we were not seeing something different. And then here's the best part, Travis. You said you agreed. Now, guess when you disagreed? Guess when you rage quit like a little bitch? The second the image came up with the overlay showing you that everything we had gone over, everything that we had agreed on, everything that everyone in this goddamn community had seen, whether it be your video or the 35 pictures of that situation in my computer, Travis. Not only did we do the 2 images you asked us to do, but in doing those 2 images, you outed your fucking self, and that's how Erebus caught you. That's not our fault. That's your fault. That's you being fucking dishonest. That's you not even understanding what the fuck you're doing. Congratulations. You can push a fucking button on a camera, Travis, but now it's time to learn what the fuck you're looking at in those fucking cameras when you show it to everyone else. All your videos, all your images, your explanations are even fucking showing it's a globe. The only thing stopping you from being a glober, Travis, is the fact that you don't even know what the fuck you're looking at either way. So again, I'm going to say this one last time. Travis, keep my fucking name out your mouth in a disrespectful manner. Otherwise, you're going to get the pissed off me, and that's the last thing you're going to want to fucking deal with. I promise you. I fucking promise. All right, guys. I'm in a better mood now. I exhaled. And again, I want to make this very clear. The ether fucking ban, it's fucking dead. Just bow your heads to him. Apologize. Show your condolences for his loss. And move on. Now I'm going to go ahead and open up the panel. I'm not even sure who's over at Discord because I didn't click over there yet. Let me see. Oh no, my bunker's not working. Oh, there we go. Sean's here, but I think he's on his way home still. But yeah, I'm going to be over at the Discord. I'm going to go and get the link out there to you guys. So if you if you haven't joined the server, you can join and give your opinion on what just happened. Okay. And I want to say for the record, I may not be doing certain denial of crap, but I Jose, yo, man, I still do an open panel myself. So you're not the only one, yo. Just kidding. I'm an asshole. I'm so strict. I censor the shit out of my shit. I know. What's up, Blondie? How you doing? I see you out there. All right. So again, I'm back. I am now going to be in there. Let me go ahead and open up my mic. So I'm muted over there. What's up, Digital? How you doing? What's up, Sean? I know you're still driving, Sean. I just want to say what's up. What's up, Blue Marble? Someone talk to me. Please? Please?
Hello, Sean.
Hey, there he is. What's up, Blue? How you doing, sir?
Doing well, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great now. I was angry earlier, and the worst part is I'm not sure if anyone noticed this at all. Okay, so when I did my live stream, like I do the reminder and all that stuff and post it.
Yeah.
It said open topic, open panel. That was about 45 minutes before I went live, and I went, hey, I didn't see Jose's today, so I clicked over to Jose's, and the first 3 minutes triggered the fuck out of me. And it inspired this one.
Yeah, I can see why too.
Yeah. What's up, Stingray? I see you out there, man. It was one of those things that it just was like, am I hearing what I'm hearing right now? It didn't make sense. I'm fixing your role right now, Dr. Bob, so just in case you were going to ask. And you're good to go now. There you go.
You say what's up before.
All right. Yeah, so I don't even know. There's nowhere to even go with him about it. I mean, with Erebus's help, we and all you guys, obviously, you guys were there in the hangouts, but Ether Band's dead. Damn it.
Yeah, Erebus pretty much put that to bed. Erebus pretty much.
And I wasn't even going from like so. I was watching this one movie, and it was like this dude was in court, and he wanted to be all like clean and wanted to get out of the crime, like honestly, but he had like some dirt on the other people, and the second the other people got personal, the dude was like, "Yeah, use that," and he got all personal with it and shit. It's kind of how it felt like. It was like that's why that night ended up that way. It was like he started raging. I went Erebus, go for it, and that's why Erebus went off. But I'm gonna tell you right now, you act like Travis did at the end of that stream. That's what's happened. That's exactly what's gonna happen.
Yeah, he totally got triggered that day. I mean, we went over it quite a bit, and it was definitely disproven.
Yeah, it was like the first time I had realized the only possible way, if there is a way to convince a science denier, it's you have to take your time and you have to go over shit 75 times. But here's the main thing that I realized was important. And this is why I no longer care about fucking the flat earth, because no matter what the conversation is, first of all, you're not going to get anywhere using that term. Nowhere. It's keep it at science. But the worst part is you go over something and it's forgotten. And I realize now it's on purpose.
They do it just to wear you down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just do it to wear you down. You know, they think that if they ask you the same thing 40 times, your answer is going to be somehow different.
Yeah, that's the ridiculous part, because I've now noticed something that's happening that pisses me off, and it's not even your fault, Dr. Bob. It's not Blue Marble Science's fault. It's not Jeremy's over at our Jim Panda's fault. I've been hearing a lot of, I'm not going to do so much of the, the uploads or the explaining to certain peoples and all this stuff. And again, if it wasn't for you guys like you guys, I'd be screwed, because that's how I figured out where the fuck I live. that's how I understand where I live now, because you guys would take time talking to me, explaining these things to me over and over again. But it's very clear, and I'm pretty sure everyone has noticed that it's even worn on me. Like I see how the disrespect now starts, because at a certain point, it becomes disrespectful that they're just fucking with you. And to me, it's like, okay, well, like you guys just heard, hey, if you're gonna disrespect me, I have no problem doing the same. I will put you on my shit list without even thinking about it.
I've got another approach that I do, and I think more of us should do it. I make videos for the people in the audience. If I get flat-tards that want to sit down and ask me stupid questions again and again and again, that's fine. I'll answer your questions. $20 super chat. Otherwise, your question's deleted.
Mm-hmm. And that's how I figured
I'm just
out.
going to charge them for my time of having to deal with them.
Yep. Well, that's how I figured out how to get to deal with Aaron. Aaron can come on my stream anytime he wants, and he can do his little takeover shit. But the second he does it, it becomes his produced show. Okay. Well, Aaron, you need to send me $400 to my super chat or $200 to my PayPal, and you can produce a whole damn stream to yourself, buddy. But otherwise, I ain't got no time for fucking Aaron. Aaron's a joke.
Well, I told Nathan Thompson I'd debate him for $200, but I'm not going to talk to him otherwise. I figured that's the cost of my time for an hour of dealing with his shit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's a tutoring fee.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it fucking feels like. That's the worst part.
With all your videos, I think first off, you've answered quite a few of the questions, and if they have other questions, well, I mean, it's just more fuel for you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys see the one from 24/7 Flat Earth Discord from yesterday? I actually had somebody sit down and say, well, if the clouds are parallel to the ground and the clouds curve, that doesn't mean the ground curves too. Or words to that effect. And you just sit down and you think, oh my fucking God. I mean, I was, I almost didn't know how to respond to that. I was nice about it. And I said, oh, no, good question. Here's how it works.
What oven mitts are for, Bob?
I don't have any oven mitts, man. I need some because, I'm going to lose an eye.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, so here's the thing. A lot of you guys I don't know, and I understand that if I give you a panel roll and something happens, I'm just going to boot you. So if you don't have a verified roll, you're limited, and if you have a panel roll, you can talk, but I have control. So just want to get that out there before everyone starts chatting it up. But you guys who just entered, you guys are going to be able to talk if you would like. But just know I'm here, yo. Earth and Reggie.
He's got his hand on the button.
Consider yourself special because Sean wouldn't let me talk for the first 4 weeks. Just kept me on mute.
I swear I had no clue. It's not my fault.
Oh, and by the way, don't facepalm if you wear glasses. It hurts.
Hey, how you doing, foreigner? Wait. We
I'm
all
alright,
gotta stop.
foreigner. How are you?
We're all stopping.
Love your music, man. Love your music.
Hang on, guys. Hang on. How you doing, Stingray?
Doing very well, Sean. Yourself?
I missed you, buddy. I'm just gonna say that now.
Don't bring it down to this level.
You just left. You left me like that. You just up and left.
Don't get soppy. Don't act like a woman, man. Seriously.
All right, my bad. I got it, man. I'm all right. I got this. I got it.
Me too.
Just let it out, Sean. You'll feel better.
No, I won't. I hate Stingray. He's an asshole. He wouldn't involve me on his. Never mind. No, I really needed you around, Stingray, because here's the thing. I'm not sure if you knew it or not, but I don't talk Actually no, I won't entertain flat Earth anymore here.
Good.
Now, if you come at me with some scientific shit, because science denying is regardless, but yeah, there's no more of that. And I needed observations and 3D modeling for stuff that just explains science in general.
Oh, wait a minute. What was I? Oh, that was it. I was doing back when I gave a shit. I was wait a minute. I was doing a physics spring simulation to visualize space-time in 3D.
That would be awesome.
Because obviously, yeah. I've never finished it though, and I seriously can't be asked now, to be honest. Because I'm like you, it's I'm not interested in engaging flat Earth. I mean, today I just got a little bit bored in doing my work, and I've got some serious deadlines coming up. So I just thought, I'll join in. I'll tune into Jose's show because he's veered away from that, but apparently not. Because when I joined, all they're talking about now is flat Earth, and it's like, oh Jesus. And there was Arwin on there, there was Travis, there was Chris, and Travis is doing the same old thing.
Yep.
Is doing the thing that I'm pretty sure people used to do in medieval times when they used to point at smoke or point at clouds and see spirits and then make up some random shit about that spirit because they didn't know better. Yeah. I've got Travis pointing at optical refraction saying, hey, look, what do you make of this? And they're like,
oh, I know who Reggie is.
Who's Reggie?
That's P. Mars.
Oh, is it?
Oh, yeah. You didn't hear the song? You didn't hear the song?
No.
It was like, niggers.
Yeah.
Oh, he didn't actually. No, wait, he didn't get the word out, did it?
No, I heard it a couple times. But that's the thing. I'm not. Oh yeah, I'm not monetized anymore. I don't really care. No,
yeah, but
the science things, like I'm pretty sure you realized it. Like, you can have scientific conversations with anyone, even if they deny science, and not have to be on talking about that crap anymore. So that's kind of what I am now. I don't know if Jose can run from it, but I definitely I won't entertain anymore. I won't even allow those types of on this panel right now.
I'll tell you something interesting. Is I joined in because I wanted to see if like Bansaw and Terry, because I work for a company that's based in Sydney, and my girlfriend's brother runs a classic BMW garage in Melbourne, and I happened to look at the Himawari 8 real-time satellite images and saw the bushfires and saw that the plumes and trails of smoke were reaching all the way over to New Zealand. It's like, oh my god, this is catastrophic. Oh. And I jumped on Terry's channel, just to check up and see if things were all right and that kind of thing. And they were playing Dell's video,
oh yeah,
Dell's. Yeah. However,
nice.
he's obviously right. Do you know what the United Kingdom is? It's the kingdoms of Scotland, Wales, and Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, at the moment, the main political party in Scotland is wanting to break the union and have an independence referendum. And after watching that video, I am going to fucking vote for that as well. I need to detach Scotland from my country. So I can just say, Dell is nothing to do with me, because that was some next level dumb shit on there. I've never wanted to separate from millions of people so much just for one person.
Are you saying you're going to fire Scotland?
Yes! I'll vote for it. Jesus, just get them out.
Do we lose Craig and Katz too?
Not
you
Katz,
lose Craig,
no.
yeah. Craig's in Scotland.
Is that?
Oh shit!
Maybe he'll move.
So I was going to do this announcement yesterday, but I forgot, and I was going to do the announcement on the other stream, but I got yanked off YouTube. I'm probably going to be in Australia in like a month.
Oh crap! Where?
I don't know yet. I got to plan that shit out.
Well, don't go to the
someplace on fire.
Yeah, don't go to the southeast at the moment.
I'm pretty sure
there's currently military operations to evacuate 4,000 people from the beach over the next 3 days.
Yeah,
I've been through fires. I know what's going down. Oh wait, what? Oh no, I've fought in 2 of California's largest wildfires.
No, nice.
Yeah, no, I know
Well,
what's up. I'm not.
get yourself down
It's
there
not,
and volunteer.
it's not like
then. Jesus.
it's not like I burnt this. I burnt my stove. No, I've seen some shit. If anyone has never seen a mile tall wall of fire, I have. Shit ain't cool at all. You guys don't do a lot quiet.
Oh, wait a minute. So Gleam's in the chat and he's just shown an animation of space time, which is similar to what I was going to do, but I was going to do the magnet. I wasn't going to do a lattice whereby it's just. It was just distortion based on center of mass and all that kind of stuff. I was going to do color and magnitude of unit vectors. If you know what that is, to visualize the effect. So even though that does it, Gleam, I was going to do it in a different way that was probably a little bit more visual.
That would be a lot better.
But I'm not wasting time now.
No. But okay. Well, I have something for you.
All space.
I have a request for something for you to do that isn't a waste of time. So you know how the Earth sits in a gravity well, but that gravity well is infinitely around the Earth. I need something like that. Because
I hate to tell you this, but visualizing infinite space is pretty hard.
Yeah, I know, but you know what I mean? Like, imagine the gravity well encompassing the Earth, but in being able to see that.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact you just asked somebody to model to image infinity.
I didn't say well, I did, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of did.
No. But it was only in my explanation of what I need. You guys, okay, so when I say the gravity well, I'm pretty sure you guys know I mean. When they depict the gravity well, man. When they depict the gravity well,
we're going to use my dining room table and say that the Earth is infinitely small on that dining room table, and it'll just look flat. There you go.
Okay, but you know how they depict the Earth in the gravity well? It looks like the Earth is sitting in the gravity well, but it's really not. It's at the center, but it's everywhere. God damn it! I don't know how to say it.
So you mean they visualize they visualize the forces in a 2D sense, but you want to see it in a 3D sense.
Yes.
So that it's not just on a plane; it's all around.
Yes. So you would almost be looking at a tangled web of space around an Earth. It'd almost look like.
Well, yeah. What you'd be looking at is a radial grid of points. Well, not a grid, a radial arrangement of points that also have lines on them to dictate magnitude of the gravitational forces at that point that would change as it's going outward. So that when objects move into it, you can see how those the magnitudes change from the color or length of the vector.
So it's the same thing you were talking about, but I'm talking about it as just the gravity well around the planet. You're talking about to visualize it as in space.
Well, no, that is the gravity well. The gravity well is a 3D force field. So that's all that is.
What I mean, what you were saying that you were coming up with, it would be almost the same thing with the magnitudes. I mean, in showing where the force is at, or as you would say, the curvature, bending of space time.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm just sorry. I'm just reading what Gleam's put.
He writes paragraphs. What's up, Jose? You can talk and everything.
What's up? What's up?
All right, cool.
I'm using a potato.
We heard.
Hey, how about this morning, man? You missed it. I sent you a message, but you were not around. Oh well.
Oh, no, yeah. I was at work. I did hear it, Jose. Did you hear about the first 15 minutes of my stream?
No, I just checked in.
Yeah, so
5 minutes ago.
Yeah, so before I went live, I listened to the beginning of your stream, and the first 10 minutes triggered the fuck out of me. So I went off on, so I had a little rant the first 15. You should listen to it. It was fun.
I will do that. Yeah.
But yeah, Travis, well, you pretty much, you said it pretty clear. You were like, well, haven't you and Sean had many of these talks? And he just skirted around it.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing. He acted as if you didn't know that we had many talks about it.
Do you want to know a weird statistic? And I'm pretty sure this is true. I am pulling out my ass, but I'm pretty certain that the ratios would stack up. That more people believe in dragons than believe in flat Earth. I think we ought to fix the dragon believers.
I actually know a couple people that believe in dragons.
Yeah.
And those what do you call them? Pixie fairies.
Shout out to BB.
Oh no, not them. They don't think that shit's real though. No, they don't think that shit's real. I'm talking about real people that think that shit is real. I mean, I don't talk to them anymore, so I guess that's good for me.
Yeah, but Sean, that's a great conversation when you're high.
It is. It's funny you say that because I was just talking to somebody about dragons. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, but yeah, I was triggered by that, by his conversation he had with you. Chris pissed me off, but Chris always pisses me off. He didn't trigger me though. I'm used to Chris.
Yeah. It was an interesting thing because they were the first two people that came in, and I think I was in there for like 10 or 15 minutes before anybody else joined in. I think, yeah, like half an hour probably. But then, it started getting a little more dynamic and better. Still, I said, like, all right, just explain to me, talk to me. That was their chance to speak up and be heard by a bunch of people. They did what they did,
Yeah. Well, like I said,
I was hesitant. I don't know if I could handle that much stupid at once. It took me a while to join.
well, I can tell you right now.
And then Arwin joined by the end. Arwin brought the heat at the end, but it was something else.
My God! Don't mention Arwin.
Trifecta.
Jesus.
I'm happy I don't have to deal with those people. That's the worst. That is you just named the worst of the worst. And I'm gonna tell you right now, if I would have joined, Travis would have left. Travis won't have that conversation with me.
Sean, did you hear Arwin though?
The last thing I've heard about Arwin was Jose's upload. That was the only one.
Arwin was adamant that the relationship between your elevation and the distance to the horizon is linear. Yet
It's linear, I tell you.
But wouldn't or couldn't provide numbers, although it's his intuition and it's absolutely correct. Except he hasn't measured it and he can't quantify it.
I'm going to tell you right now, in 3 years, I have never sat and listened to Arwin talk. Everything out of his mouth is Dungeons and Dragons. Everything. Like, motherfuckers, you're talking to a dude that lives in a fucking video game and thinks he is like letting his avatar sleep when he goes online. I bet you. I'm telling you right now.
Nice.
I got him on the 7 questions once, and he was telling me that the black moon was responsible for tides, and then started carrying on a 15-minute dissertation on the black moon, and I couldn't believe my luck. I mean, thank God I was recording it.
The black moon is the one that's invisible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course it is, because nobody's ever seen it.
That's my favorite one. Favorite. What is it? Ratu or Butu or whatever the fuck their names are. I know you guys know what I'm talking about.
They call it Lilith.
Oh, come now.
They call it Lilith.
No, there's
Lilith.
There's supposed to be.
This is the black moon, and there's another one that you're talking about. But he was very adamant that they were 2 different things because they're real.
Like the only time I've ever even heard him claim anything was him saying that the Earth was a rectangle, and that was 3 years ago. And now, the second he said that, I went, "Nope, you're not someone I'm listening to."
I thought GPS came up with the perfect question. I just think it's perfect. If the sun's traveling away, how come we cannot read any electromagnetic energy from it once it suddenly disappears? And it's not a gradual fall off; it's a obscured. Oh my God! It's just suddenly gone.
Yep.
It's like that doesn't follow the inverse square law at all, and it's just gone. Where did it go?
Okay, here's the problem.
You know, the bad question is will it come back?
No, hang on. So wait. So if you were teaching
We
someone,
need to sacrifice a virgin.
but if you were teaching someone what you're talking about right now, what would be the very first step to teaching, say, a second grader what we're talking about right now?
The energy conservation and the inverse square law of everything around us, and demonstrating it and proving it, because after that you can infer so much.
Okay. Now, what about a first grader?
If you can't see it, you can't read it.
Okay. So first grade is where we need to. That's where we need to start. Stop with all these technical and scientific methods no.
If you have two parallel lines and one curves, that means the other has to curve because they're parallel. They cannot comprehend that.
I think the amazing thing today, Bob, was your little laser, and I realized the disconnect with Chris. Just asking the simple question, do you think looking at an object under heavy refraction through the atmosphere moves that object apparently up or apparently down? And he just said down. And it's like, oh my God, we're done. You can't go on from that.
No, you can't. And then, you show them a laser beam curving, and what was it that Travis came up with? Are you saying it's curving with the curve of the Earth? No, you don't. Oh my God! No, we're talking about refraction. I'm giving you a practical demonstration of refraction. We're not talking about the curve of the Earth. We're talking about refraction.
I'm gonna tell you right now. I learned everything I know about refraction thanks to Chris and Travis, because the time I went through it with them, I learned every aspect of refraction that I could possibly learn in having these conversations. And I thank them for that. I just don't like Travis anymore. And the worst part is for them is that, and here's the thing, if you, and I know Blue Marble Science
wait a minute, Sean, I've got a question. You said any more, that implies that there was a time that you did like him.
Yeah.
Travis?
Just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, me and Travis were buddies. We were awesome.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, I'm telling you, we were cool. Yeah. And then the second
honestly, it might be the weed, but I can't tell whether you're being sarcastic or not. And I don't mean I'm on the weed. I mean, when you're on the weed, I can't tell whether you're being sarcastic or not.
I'm being serious. We were cool.
Blue, do you have a spare set of oven mitts?
Triple strength. Extra padding.
Trust me, you guys would hate me so much more if I didn't smoke. Put it this way, I was triggered because I hadn't smoked. Which on another note, Dr. Bob, I really want to do a stream about cannabis and CBDs and all that stuff, but like on a more serious note.
Put it in the water supply, things will be better.
Could you do that?
No.
Oh. Well, I mean, legally, I know. But is there a way?
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Was that a question of can we do that, please? Or is it possible to do that? Because I don't know.
Damn, does everyone feel that way about me when I smoke? Damn, my apologies. I'll try to be a bit more. Is it possible to do that, Dr. Bob?
No.
Is it not? Yeah, but you can eat it. You can have it.
You can eat it, but trying to get the concentration in the water supply would probably
be a waste of time.
Well,
I just
if you really loaded it up.
Yeah.
If you really loaded it up, it might work for, like maybe an hour, and then people forget how the fucking water plant works. Do I turn the switch on or off?
That's fucked up, because I don't ever forget how to turn shit on and off. I don't think I have.
So, did you hear the new Canadian question they're using to try and find people that are driving while stoned?
Oh, geez, what's that?
Pizza comes in a square box, but it's round and the slices are triangular. And if they go, whoa, they haul them in.
Wait, Canada hasn't legalized it yet? I don't get that.
Well, no, it's legal here in Michigan, but you just can't drive with it. It's legal for me to drink, but I can't drive when I'm drinking.
But they can't. But that's the thing, though. They can't. How do they determine the levels?
We have things called drug recognition officers here, who claim to have training and be able to recognize people that are high on drugs. And then we also have an oral swab that they're starting to do, and you can draw blood.
But But don't you need a base level? Oh, okay. Well, that's better yet.
Zero tolerance. If you have any in you, if you have any in you, and you're a recreational user, that you're done. If you're a medical user, they have to show that you have it in you and you're impaired.
Yes. Okay. Because that's the issue. Like, it may be different because of California. I'm not sure, but one of the big issues they're having right now is how do we evaluate if someone is impaired? Because right now, basically, if your car smells like marijuana inside, all you really need to say is it was from earlier today.
You don't say anything, man. Don't ever admit. Look at him and shrug.
See, I did do that once.
No, don't say no. Just look at him and shrug.
Okay. Well,
all right.
Because there's no breathalyzer, but I know they're trying. They want something, but
they have an oral swab now. They're testing it out here in Michigan.
Okay, and like you said, if you're recreational, anything. Well, see, how's that possible? Okay, so an oral swab wouldn't give you a positive test hours after.
10, 12 hours sometimes, yeah.
So wait, they don't want you to drive for 10 to 12 hours?
No. If you have active THC in you, you're not technically allowed to drive.
Oh, shit.
Carboxy. Yeah, carboxy's okay. That's ruled as being inert and not a controlled substance. But active THC, you're going to run into issues.
So, wow.
But they're starting to relax a little bit right now. They're kind of getting the stick out of their ass.
Kind of have to on that one.
Well, no, it's just they know they're on the wrong side of history. And they're kind of figuring out, especially now that it's recreational, they just need to calm the fuck down.
I mean, I don't know all the laws, but obviously besides the breathalyzer, I wouldn't mind it being the same as alcohol, having a limit and then going to, anything beyond that limit. But I don't know how
that's the problem that you run into is there's an actual fixed limit on alcohol that you can reliably be impaired with.
Yeah.
There is no average limit on THC.
Yeah, okay.
Because some people have, 15, some people have 5, and the guy that's got 5 is, stoned out of his head. And the one that has 15 has just been using it for a while and, tolerates it and is not impaired at all.
Okay, yeah. And because
I need that sign.
It's good, isn't it?
Severus, I need that sign.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I definitely need that sign.
Yeah, the sign is awesome. I'll show everyone on
Well, look, I'll give you an example of what they did here in Michigan once. Now, I am personally aware of a case. The thing is in Michigan that, if you're a caregiver, you can grow 12 plants for each of your patients. Mm. But, if you've got 2 patients and yourself, you're allowed to have 36 plants. If your spouse has 2 patients and herself, she can have 36 plants. But if you're in your room, and I actually had a case because they had 2 separate rooms that they were growing these things in. But the cops came in and said, well, there's an artificial ceiling up there, and there's a gap of 14 inches between the top of the wall and the roof. So technically, since you can crawl over that gap and get into the other room, you're in possession of all 72 plants, and we're busting you.
What the fuck?
And that was my response.
Now, do you see the federal law changing? You almost think it'd have to, or not?
Yes, well, my personal thing that I'm going to do is that this next election may very well be based on who's vowing to legalize cannabis federally. And, that's something that they're going to toss out in the election year. And they're going to run on it as a plank in their platform to try and get the votes from those folks, because I think it's going to be a tight election here. But they're going to use it as a political football. There's a lot of money in keeping it illegal.
But there's also a lot of money in legalizing it.
Yeah, but it's, I'll tell you,
a best interest thing.
I'll tell you a story. I was having dinner with my stepbrother, and he ran into one of his friends from high school and called him over to the table. The guy's a federal probation officer now. So, idiot boy here with no internal governor here, no internal filter. So, you ever think cannabis is going to be legal? And his answer was telling as a federal law enforcement officer, not during my career. So he didn't give a shit about the chaos that he was he was doing to people. As long as his paycheck depended on him supervising cannabis patients, or cannabis criminals.
Mm.
He wanted to keep it illegal. Once he retired, he didn't give a shit because he was going to draw his pension. But that's just self-serving, and I don't. It's screw everybody else as long as I get mine.
Yeah. What's it? What damn what was I gonna say? Okay, so the same. It's kind of the same thing as are they allowing hemp to be grown in the United States at all yet?
Yes, they've got a program here in Michigan.
Oh, okay. So that's a definite start. Because that was kind of one of the things that I noticed.
I want to see the Indians do it, man.
Say again?
I want to see the Indians do it.
Well,
they have a little bit of leeway because they're technically sovereign nations under the protection of the United States. So if they really pushed it, I think that they may be able to pull something off with that. But it's a question of whether they want to.
Yeah, but shit. If they legalized growing hemp in the United States, people would see a huge change in a lot of stuff, a lot, and it'd be for the best too. You'd actually see it cheaper. That's the crazy part.
Well, no, hemp is fiber. Hemp is just fiber. It's not.
No, but
it's not cannabis. But
no. I'm not talking. Yeah, no, hell no. I'm talking on making materials and fabrics and the fuels. I'm talking all the
sucking up carbon and no-till agriculture, the whole 9 yards.
Clothes and food. Clothes and fuel. You can.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm talking.
Make plastics out of it. You can make biodiesel out of it.
Yep. And that is hemp on its own. And it's again,
yeah.
That was the thing. It is a crazy ass plant.
Well, it's hard. It's easy to grow and hard to harvest. Is the problem?
I would say it's easy to harvest.
My mom and dad used to be able to harvest.
No. But I'm not talking about cut the plant down. I'm talking about separating out the fibers.
Oh,
there's specialized equipment you need to get the fibers out.
Yeah, isn't that what the argument for making it illegal, and because the paper mills would have to restructure their machines if they used hemp and all that stuff, or get new machines? Is that part of?
Well, part of the original reason they did it was they had a lot of scrap lumber from topping trees out, Weyerhaeuser and those guys.
Mm-hmm.
They had all this stuff from topping out trees, and they could make paper out of it, but they couldn't compete with hemp, and make as much profit. So,
yeah.
One of the things they wanted to do is get rid of the competition with hemp. Hemp used to be your best paper.
Just to be that's a crazy part. Like, a lot of people don't know about it. Like, you can build your house with fucking hemp stock. It's like all these things are. It's
ranks right up there with bamboo, and bamboo doesn't grow here.
Well, not naturally. But that's the thing, though. People don't realize is they could probably take we'll say 1/10 of a forest, cut it down, and only grow hemp on it. And guess what would happen? They wouldn't have to cut any other fucking trees down if they really wanted to make a production out of that much area. But that's what people don't realize. Like, it takes 60 years to get it to do the tree cycle, the tree farm cycle thing they do. We would have 100 times more.
Get 3 or 4 crops a year.
Yeah. Oh, easy. And that's like, we're talking easy. Like, that's we're not talking about, we don't worry about weather, because that shit is hardy too. It will almost grow everywhere.
But yeah, it goes all the way from the tropics to the temperates.
That's the crazy part. That's the part that really confuses me. That's how.
Dude, it's a weed. Well, it grows everywhere. It's a weed.
Yeah. Well, that's what one of the things. I'm not going to say conspiracy. I will say a topic with interest became clear to me was that one, and that was I didn't realize that before I even ever smoked. It was like, well, wait, they did this and this. They're making all these things with hemp, and then they just stopped. That doesn't make any sense. And now it's completely illegal. Oh, but it's illegal to grow, but we can buy it from Canada. That's what didn't make sense to me.
Well, we got a big thing with the Canadians trying to buy mines up in the UP to grow hemp in, or grow cannabis in.
Well, that's the big thing in California now. That's the real weird thing about California that I know about. There's 100 to 1,000 dispensaries in delivery places, but there's only 3 licenses in all of San Diego. And it's kind of like the wild, wild west out here right now. I don't think it's as structured as it should be, but it's weird because they get shut down and they move on. And then now the big one, like now most of them are all deliveries, and they deliver to your house and they rip you off because you can't see. It's ridiculous. It is the wild, wild west right now.
Well, the problem is the cops will drive past, 3 crack houses and a dead hooker in a ditch to bust grandma with her 13 plants for her glaucoma.
Yeah, that's the insane part, because if you're talking even on a medical level, it's easier to grow your own plant, medicate yourself, and the time and money to do that is far cheaper than in lessens half of the pain meds you have to take, in my opinion. That's not a study. That's just my opinion.
I have a study.
Well, like I said,
I've got a series of 10,000 patients. I may actually present it at a medical conference next year.
Because for me, the main reason I started smoking was I have ADD, or I have ADHD, and I'm from the 80s, so that was when they were convinced.
Drink some Mountain Dew and just get over it.
But see, yeah, that's the fun part, when you realize that your body doesn't work the same way, and the opposite does the opposite. So basically, I used it. It helps me focus. It literally stops me from meandering to 10 to 15 different things at one time, and it helps me focus big time. And the way, like you were saying earlier,
is it going to kick in soon?
Oh, what the hell? Like you were saying earlier, like they're the levels, a 5 to 15 and stuff. It's like, for me, I'm up there. A lot of people don't like hearing it, but like I when I'm working, I feel more comfortable if I have a little in me. At the same time, there's definitely that time you want to be sober and serious, and I can do it, so I'm not an addict with it.
As long as you're not Wolfie's first officer, I'm fine with that.
Who's Wolfie's first officer? What's that mean?
Wolfie's co-pilot.
Why?
Do you know who Wolfie is?
Kind of. I don't, man. You know how many people I listen to? Yeah, I know he's a pilot. Okay, I see.
Yeah, I see. No, he flies a corporate jet. Yeah, I don't want anybody flying a jet that's been smoking cannabis.
Why?
Reaction times. I'm talking about actively smoking cannabis in the cockpit.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's
just
but wouldn't the same be true if they were driving down the interstate on it with a truck and a large load at the back?
I don't really care to have anybody driving that's been using cannabis.
See, I don't. do all that. That's like to do all that. That takes a lot, and there's a lot that can happen in that time, and that's dangerous. I wouldn't do that. It's in my system, but no, I'm not the type that will pack a bullet while I'm driving a fucking my 20-ton machine behind me. No, because here's the other thing: you get in an accident, something happens, some dumb ass cut in front of you, and they find that in your rig. Guess what happens? You get in trouble for it, as if you were doing it all as the accident happened. It becomes your fault. That's why you don't ever want to be doing it like that. That is ridiculous. That's just in itself. If you got hit by a drunk driver, if you understand, if they found drugs in your car, they stop looking at the drunk driver as it's all his fault. You got to think about everything like that. That's just the way it is.
Well, I mean, we run into that out here too, with firearms. Because, there's a lot of firearms in northern Michigan.
That's the other hard.
And, technically you're not allowed to have firearms if you use cannabis. But, it's not like they go door to door. It's not like they go door to door and check. But if you ever come to the attention of law enforcement and they start looking at you, that's the first thing they're going to look for.
Yeah. Here in California, it's weird. So, what ended up happening is everyone that had medical marijuana, we were, you pay it was like $60 or something like that, and it lasts a year. Well, the thing is if you had a firearms license, and I think it was 2018 they passed this bill. So if you had both, they would suspend your firearm license until your Medicard expired. They didn't drug test you. They made it clear you cannot have a medical marijuana license or medical marijuana card and have a firearm, and they made it very clear. So what they would do, that's what they would do. They suspend your firearms until you didn't have a medical one anymore. And then a lot of people.
I challenged them on that. I went down to register a pistol at the police department down here, and I noticed that they changed the form.
Mm-hmm.
There's a federal firearms registration form, and they added another question: do you have a medical marijuana card? And I said, what's this on here for?
Yep, I filled that out just recently.
And they said, well, we want to know if you have a medical marijuana card. And, well, what if I do? So what? That doesn't prove that I'm using it. I could simply be supporting the program in solidarity with my neighbors. And they said, well, we assume that if you have a card, you're using it.
Yep.
And we'll deny you your firearms license.
Yep. My problem is why don't they do that with your license? Because with your license, you can get alcohol. And we know for a fact there are more alcohol DUI or DUI accidents due to alcohol than marijuana, in my opinion, at least.
Do you know why?
Probably because people that smoke weed want to just sit down.
No, I'm saying, have you ever seen any automobile accident statistics that are directly related to cannabis?
No.
See, here's what they do. They're lazy. Now, you can test for carboxy THC in just about any body fluid, urine, things like that. It's an easy test to do. However, testing for cannabis requires a blood draw, or a THC requires a blood draw.
Mm.
So what they'll do is they'll find a victim of an automobile accident. Now, his blood alcohol level, of course, is 400 milligrams percent, and he's, drunk off his, almost pass out drunk.
Mm.
But he has carboxy THC in him because he smoked a joint 3 weeks ago. Oh, well, cannabis was a contributing factor. And then they cite that in cannabis statistics in automobile accidents.
Wow.
It's carboxy. It's not active. It's a way of manipulating the statistics.
That's the stuff that sticks to the fat, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, you see, the other thing that happened was Bill Schuette, who was our attorney general here, was an avid anti-cannabis person. He actually was head of the group that tried to oppose, the Medical Marijuana Act. And then he became Attorney General of Michigan. And, he was famous for going out in front of the press and saying, well, the average cannabis patient's a 24-year-old with a hangnail. So that kind of pissed me off, and I decided to do something. So when I was writing the software for my practice, my medical record, I got it so that it would collect statistics. And I can tell you right now, on a series of 10,000 patients, my average patient age is 51. So don't give me a bunch of bullshit that they're a 24-year-old with a hangnail. And generally, they have 3 and 4 qualifying conditions each.
Damn.
So, and I put that out on my webpage so that people could actually, from the news media and such, could actually go and call him on his shit. And they would look at my website, they'd look at the statistics and say, well, I'm sorry, but here's a large series, and they're not 21 years old, and they don't have hangnails, And here's hard data. Do you have hard data, Mr. Schutte? And as a result, they changed their reporting in the state and actually started using real statistics.
But okay, so do you think there is a fair way of doing it?
Fair? What do you mean?
Fair way of establishing the cannabis levels. So like you were saying, like
I don't think you're going to have a number. I don't think you're going to be able to give me a number. I think that you can give me a behavior, but you can't give me a number.
So basically, people, for instance, like myself, who've done it for a while, are going to be able to get away with it compared to the people who haven't.
No. The tolerance level is 0. So if you're positive, you're wrong.
But that's
the basis that they start with. They're not doing the 5 nanograms like they do out in Colorado or anything like that. If you have any detectable cannabis in your system, carboxy or THC,
you're talking
they're
about
going to say,
state.
if you have detectable THC in your system, they're going to say, okay, well, you're under the influence. Now we have to show that you're impaired if you're a medical patient. If you're positive for THC and you're a recreational user, you're done. They still have to prove some impairment if you're a medical patient.
But you're saying in your state as well, because I keep forgetting that it is very much state by state, and all the different states kind of are
I'm just talking
P's and Q's. Yeah, because I realized I remember earlier when I said I'd been pulled over before, and you were like saying no. Well, here in California, they've always been pretty laxative about it. Like it's always been it's more been of an infraction more than a situation of are you impaired or not. As long as you didn't say, well, I'm still smoking, here you go. You don't really care too much, I guess.
No, they put them in jail here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because more or less, I've talked to a lot of cops just in passing and people that I know that they just don't care about it. It's like they don't interact with enough people that it's a situation. So to them, it being a big media uproar or this big topic to them, it seems so mundane to them. And that's just a lot of law enforcement that I've talked to about it. Like dealing with someone that a marijuana situation is rare almost.
Well, the problem that you run into is there's something called civil asset forfeiture. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
All right. That's big out here.
Yeah, no, it's
and
big
they
here too.
like going after cannabis patients because unlike a meth lab, where everything is contaminated, they can sell your PlayStation, your TV, your house, your car, your guns. I mean, people that get arrested for cannabis generally have assets that they can seize. And they do it on a regular basis.
Give me 1 sec. I got to answer the door real quick. Go ahead and keep going, though. I can hear you. I have my Bluetooth.
All right. But, they have a big sale out here in Cadillac, Michigan every couple of years. And the amount of stuff that they take off of people, and 80-90% of it is over cannabis.
Our county sheriff here in Tennessee financed an entire damn air force of helicopters. At one point, we had 7 flying helicopters. That's more than in Los Angeles County. And he was doing it all with the property seizure.
Yeah. I don't know. That's one of the reasons I ran for the House here is that I really don't like that. There's a couple of things that I really don't like that are being done. I don't think every county needs a militarized police force. I think we need maybe three things under the state police at strategic locations throughout the state that are, crisis response units. I don't think every damn county needs an armored personnel carrier.
Oh yeah, they have school divisions with them now.
That's another thing that always bothered me. I really don't like the idea of having police officers in schools. If you need a cop, call one.
Nah, I disagree on that. What about teachers having firearms?
I don't have a problem with that, but I don't have a problem with that at all. But I do have a problem with police officers in schools because then they try and find things to do. You send somebody a dick pic, when you're 16 years old.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
You can both be charged with child pornography that destroys your life.
Well, yeah.
They're very quick to do it.
I definitely think that if there is some, it is literally a situational prevention, not or you know what I mean? What do you say?
I don't know if it's so much preventing. I think that a lot of times they find things to do.
Well, I think,
and that's a problem.
Well, the thing
in
is,
high school,
I think they should only be there for fights. See, it's kind of weird how that goes.
Do you think everybody that goes to high school and has a fight should be arrested and given a criminal record?
Oh, absolutely not. No.
Well, that's what they do.
Here's the thing. I think the idea that if you get in a fight at school, you could go to jail is a good thing. Again, I fought for a very long time. And here's the thing. I'm scared out of my mind to fight outside of a ring. Here's what happens. Someone's head bounces off that concrete. That's a murder charge. And knowing that there is a consequence at school, I think is a good thing.
Having a fist fight is one thing. If a weapon is involved or if you don't stop when they're down, that's something that needs to be looked at more closely. I mean, the rest of it is, a detention or a suspension.
But then you're talking who's going to referee a street fight.
You're not necessarily dealing with a referee situation in a street fight, and the police officer's not going to come out and rough you.
Well, that's the thing. That's why it
but
should
is the consequence going to be different if he comes from the principal's office or he comes from the police station or a road officer?
It will.
No.
It will if you punch a kid and his head hits the ground. It'll be the
but I mean, does it matter if the cop comes from the principal's office or a road officer from the police?
Right. Yeah,
no, it doesn't.
You're right, 100%.
The consequences are still there.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
But do we need that officer sitting in the principal's office? Now, in this day of school shootings and stuff, that's different, perhaps. And maybe that's just me that, I don't like the idea of involving law enforcement in school issues between children.
Well, you got to remember, because I come from the era where I had just got out of I was in high school when the first few happened. We had one here in San Diego at one of the high schools just as I got out of high school. And this is when I saw in California us doing it, which is probably the same thing you're talking about, is where they do assign a police officer to the schools. That originally was for the response in the school shootings that were going on. But it's exactly like you said. It's, a school shooting in reality is very rare, and to hire a cop for every school is very expensive. I get that part,
especially when you have officers in the area on road patrol. The response time may be a little bit slower.
But see, that's the thing.
But the question is that going to make a difference?
To me, with a child in school. And here's the best part: in a neighborhood of a school shooting that's happened years ago, that response time is everything. And here's the problem: you are 100% right. Anything besides that, realistically, you don't need a cop there. If there's a shooting, I want a cop there. That's the problem. What I just said.
Well, the problem is do you accept the other things with it?
Exactly.
Now, my attitude is that how long did that shooting in the church in Texas last? 4 seconds. 4 seconds, and it was done. how, the damage is going to be done in the first 5 minutes, and
here's
whether or not
the big thing is that we're talking all the spider web of an incident, and the real issue is mental health.
yes,
And
no, I agree with it completely.
you know what I mean? Because you're right and I'm right, and that we know what we were saying. Because realistically, there's no win-win in that at all. You can't be right or wrong in either one of the arguments of that. But the what you're saying is right. The situation is going to happen. It's going to happen, and you got to take a step back. It's not guns. It's not every school. It
is guns. It is guns to some extent.
Well, I can say a majority of people that own a gun don't do that. So I don't think it's.
No, I agree with you. And look, do you have any questions that I'm pro firearm? I mean, you have seen my videos, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, now, but the thing about it is, there's two aspects to it. One is basically making sure that the people that shouldn't have guns don't have them.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is we need to probably take a look at the capability of our weapons. And
I think that goes
whether or not we want, how much training we want to have associated with a weapon. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
You have a right to own an AR-15. All right, that doesn't necessarily mean you know how to use one.
Exactly.
And the other thing about it is do you really want to give somebody the capability of cooking off 150 rounds in 5 minutes?
Yeah, that's
that's a deeper question, and it's a very slippery slope with that. Do you want to let people own Barrett 50s? Because you can take a helicopter down with a Barrett 50.
And that's an issue because again, like yourself, I'm for firearms. Like I have many. The problem is exactly like you're saying. If I had to I would say I want the laws to be far stricter. The problem is like you said, there are things that intertwine with my ethics of it. For instance, I smoke by law, but then at the same time, in my brain, I go, well, I don't think I'll ever have a pound of weed somewhere and my gun in the same vicinity. So does it
not a good idea?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Though, but would it matter to me? Because that's not going to happen. You know what I mean? And I know things happen, but you know what I mean too, Dr. Bob. Like there are situations that you cannot, you can keep yourself from ever being in. I'm never going to be pointing my gun at somebody that doesn't have a weapon in my face. I know that. No one else does, though. That's the issue. You know what I mean?
My issue with it is this. One, do we want to let certain firearms out on the street in the hands of civilians? And two, since we don't really want to restrict people from things that they may already have, is there, should we have a little closer look if you own certain types of weapons, maybe require a license, maybe require some training or currency or a medical exam?
Like absolutely. I think mental should be an exam you get regardless of the firearm. It would tell if a 16-year-old is capable of firing having a firearm in his possession. And then,
well, you're not always going to be able to tell, but if you do have somebody that's absolutely batshit crazy, somebody might pick that up.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if you go on in and say, "Yeah, I want to order 10,000 rounds of .308 ammunition," there needs to be a way. There needs to be a, like when I write a narcotic, and that prescription is filled at any pharmacy. All right, I can pull up a report called MAPS that tells me my patient's prescriptions in every pharmacy from any doctor in the state.
Yeah.
And I can see, so if they're going around and they're getting a prescription for the same medicine from 5 different doctors and filling them at 5 different pharmacies, it doesn't mean that I'm not allowed to write for it. It means that I have that information and it behooves me to ask, so why don't you tell me about this?
Yeah.
And if I go on down and say, look, I'm a competition target shooter, and I go through 10,000 rounds every 2 months, and this is my every 2-month fill up. Okay, well, my local sporting goods store may sit down and say, well, yeah, okay, well, that's a good reason. But if you get somebody that's buying 1,000 rounds at 5 different sporting goods stores in a weekend, why are you doing this, man?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and states need to be more with each other too, because here in California we have our stocks are only allowed to be so big. I have an SKS, which is my favorite, and here we're only allowed 12 our mags. But over in Arizona, the next state over, they don't have a limit, so you can get a banana fucking clip. Well, guess what?
My pistol holds 20 rounds, man.
Yeah, you can never get away with that. If they saw
and I can carry 3, and I got 3 mags.
Yeah, see, here in California,
and it comes with 3 mags.
Yeah,
it comes with 3 mags.
Yeah, see, I got a lot of the tips and tricks and stuff on mine, but like there are things that I know I can change if I have to ever go hunting, and I know I'm gonna have to talk to a ranger that I'll take off and all that kind of stuff. But again, like if you're not, that's the thing. I've always lived and experienced. Imagine that. I've never had to deal with these type of things where you don't put yourself in the situations for that type of situation to happen. Myself, I will never in my life get busted with firearms and 1,000 pounds of meth. Why? Because I'm not around that kind of shit. I don't associate with that shit. So like it's not going to happen. You know what I mean? And then there are people that get busted doing that, and they're like, "What was me? You were picking on me." Like, no, motherfucker.
I have a buddy that's an attorney, and he did a lot of cases like that, and I'm an expert witness in court cases on stuff like that. And he goes, you got the easy things. You just have to argue whether or not somebody can have 13 rather than 12 plants. My guys, cops show up. He's the only guy in the warehouse full of drugs, sitting on a 1,500-pound bale of marijuana, holding a machine gun. Your patients are easy.
Yeah, you're gonna trip over a bong or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
Look, man, I'm monopolizing this conversation. Nobody else is talking, but we're just kind of chatting back and forth. I probably ought to sign out here for a while and give somebody else a turn here.
All right, well, I definitely appreciate it. And obviously, the conversation could get far more in depth than I'd like to. I actually have some questions, but I left them out.
We'll do that on a designated time rather than
that's what I mean.
Here shooting the crap with everybody else being quiet.
Yeah, because I actually have some on point questions that you would need time to explain and all that stuff because I'm retarded. But yeah, you guys can talk too. You don't have to be so polite.
No.
Well, first of all, Davros. hang on, Dr. Bob. This is how you get him to talk.
Send me that sign, man.
Yeah, this is how you get him to talk. Watch this. Davros, what is the temperature?
Not freedom units.
You still talked. That is a good sign. All right. Well, if you guys aren't going to talk, I'll end the stream. How about that? Let me see if anyone said anything in the chat. I haven't looked at the chat this whole time.
I know. You got all these people in here and they say bugger all. And I sent you a message saying I'm just here to listen.
Did you?
Yeah, you don't even read your live chat for your Discord.
What were you saying? I wasn't paying attention to what you were saying. I was looking at something else.
I know. I can see it on YouTube that you.
Oh yeah. No, Davros, I was listening to you, my friend. I was there for you.
Now I feel bad. I forgot we were broadcasting this.
Oh, that's the best part. I don't care. That's the thing. I learned some shit, and I got to pick your brain, and that's food for improvement. I actually appreciate it.
Well, my big thing is that I never talk politics on my streams, and I don't like doing that.
Well, luckily, Barry wasn't too political. It was just opinions.
I thought
Like-minded.
it was just a little bit political, but I liked it.
Well, it was more, on opinions on the. It wasn't political. It feels like it's only really political when people are like butting heads about it.
Make Tartaria great again.
No.
I thought you were just listening. Don't you got to be on mute for that?
Yes, but Tartaria means mud floods, and we're not having another reset.
They're probably
You don't know, man. 5G's coming out.
You know what? There's been mudslides. It's true.
It's not a mud flood.
But there's been mud floods too.
Liquefaction's not a mud flood either.
Okay, I didn't say it was. I'm just saying there have been mud floods.
Did.
Prove it wrong.
Sean, no.
Wait. Davros. Are you telling
Do you
me?
know Australia was full of buildings when they got there? Big stone things?
That's crap.
And
that's crap.
starports?
No. I'm only making the claim that mud floods are real. That is it. Nothing beyond it, and none of the other stuff. Prove me wrong.
Sean,
they're local.
Called floods.
So?
They're called
I said mud flood. I didn't say mud event. I didn't say the world covered in mud. I said mud flood. I can make a mud flood in my backyard.
Sean.
It's called a slip and slide.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's slip and slide, man.
The other thing that's going to be fun too is I'm getting ready to do, and I'm getting ready to do some stuff on irreducible complexity, I think they call it.
I have no idea what that is.
And creationism.
Oh.
And
yeah,
the big thing that I'm going to do.
Evolution.
Yeah, the big thing that I'm going to do here in a little bit is, how everybody's talking about the vaccine injury fund paying out $4.15 billion since it started. You ever hear about that?
I have not.
They have in the United States, they have this thing called a vaccine injury fund, where if you claim that you were injured by a vaccine, you can go to this vaccine injury fund court, and they've paid out, they're always talking in the anti-vax movement about $4.15 billion paid out over this since 1988. What do you think the major claim for that's going to be?
Autism.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Actually, no, it's not autism, but I'm not going to ruin Bob's surprise.
I have no clue.
Zero. It's zero autism, by the way. They don't allow it because they've already explored it, and it's not. They have a list of conditions for each vaccination that has got what they feel is some association with it. And if you have one of those conditions, like Guillain-Barré, for example, in certain vaccines, if you have Guillain-Barré and you were vaccinated, they presume the vaccine caused it unless the vaccine can prove its innocence.
Oh, right.
I mean, it's a great standard of proof. But the major injury that is paid out is for shoulder and arm injury from the injection. Brachial plexus injuries, things like that from poor injection technique or medical errors.
Wow. Yeah, some form of myalgia or something as well.
Yeah.
Well, I get a shot, go to work, and I drop something on my foot. I blame the vaccine.
No, if you get a shot and they put it in too deep, and you get a brachial plexus injury from it.
I don't know what that is, but I know what you're talking about.
They're the big nerves in the inside of your arm that make it so that you can use your hands.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And you hit one of those with a needle and it injects something into one of those nerves, which are as big around as your little finger.
Yeah.
And damage that nerve, you're crippled. I mean, it's permanent damage, and you get compensated for that because it was a vaccination injection. And that is one of the side effects known to occur with vaccinations is damage to the brachial plexus in the shoulder.
Okay.
But that's the major. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I have all the statistics on every case put before the vaccine injury court. and I'm actually going to summarize them all vaccination by overall, and then vaccination by vaccination over the next 6 months.
Have you dealt
Bob, I've got
Have you dealt with Grim? I'm sure you have.
Grim? Yeah, I know Grim.
Don't. He's an idiot.
Well,
Right,
no,
he's an
well,
idiot.
he's not.
Well, he's not a bad guy.
No,
He's not a bad guy.
When he talks,
I've never had an issue with him.
When he talks Electric Universe, he's retarded. I can't stand that shit. Because I figured it out. Because I figured every time he talks to you, he doesn't explain to you that these are all case by case laboratory tests that are still hypothesis. They're just brainstorms. But regardless, I think he does know a lot more than most about vaccines, and in the studies that they have, he does construct his argument to sway his way without much evidence a lot, but he does have evidence that it is a situation that was looked at, and in that respect, that's why I asked if you guys had ever gone back and forth about vaccines.
Well, Jose tried to get me to go back and forth with him once about vaccines, and I asked, he said that he had a person that wanted to debate me on vaccines. And I asked, well, what are the qualifications of the person doing it? Do they have a degree in immunology, virology, medicine, or public health? And he said no, and I said, no, I'm not going to talk to him.
I get it.
Now, Grim I may make an exception for, because he's a relatively bright guy, from what I've seen with him. And, he constructs decent arguments most of the time.
Yeah,
but I may talk with him about it. But the thing about it is that you have being able to read a study is one thing. That's just language ability. Being able to understand the implications of the study are not always as clear cut as just reading it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's where training and experience comes into play.
Yeah.
And like, for example, one of the things you'll see in anti-vax a lot right now is that, if you get the measles naturally, it's a better immunity than if you're immunized.
Because your body's seen it before?
No, it's just, it gives you a little bit of a stronger immunity. And in reality, that is actually true to a very slight advantage to the immunity you get from a wild infection versus an immunization. However, the damage and the risk that you incur by actually being infected with measles far outweighs any little tiny advantage you get in immunity, both on a personal and on a community basis, which is why they recommend vaccination rather than letting people get measles. 1 to 2 out of 1,000 people that get measles die. If you look, yes, and if you look at this, the statistics from the United States before they released the measles vaccination, which was as early as '63. We had 48,000 hospitalizations due to measles a year in the United States in the late '50s, early '60s, and we had over 400 deaths. And the problem is that, compare that risk to the risk that you have of a slightly less strong immunity and all of the complications that have been compensated for in the vaccine injury fund. Compare those two risks to each other. 400 kids, 400 people died.
Yeah.
48,000 people were hospitalized. And when you have a child that has the measles, somebody's staying home from work.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So the economic injury to families. Most families, if you miss one paycheck, they're in a lot of trouble. All right. I'm a physician right now, and I'll tell you something. The fact that we haven't had much to do in the last 2 weeks because of the holidays and everything, you don't think I haven't noticed it? Super Chat's open. Oh. But
can I make a couple of little statements here?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a child who has global development disorder, which is basically the precursor to some form of autistic traits, right? he was diagnosed with that before he had his MMR vaccine. So anyone who states that MMR causes some form of autism or anything like that can go suck a dick. I have evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, you said
So
something
does the
earlier.
Vaccine Injury Fund and extensive legal and medical investigation. The problem that you run into is, when does autism become apparent? It becomes apparent about the time you're getting your vaccination. They happen to occur at the same time.
Well,
The
I was
other
gonna
thing is, why is the rate of autism going up? You know, because physicians are being made aware of it and they're looking for it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Dr. Bob about that. You had said something in about the autism thing, and I was gonna ask, is there a possibility? And this is me just asking because I don't know. Is there a possibility that the vaccines can show these signs of autism that are in the child before the vaccine? Like, kind of
I
something
wouldn't.
that
I
don't
wouldn't
know.
think so. But
Okay.
you see, the thing is, in order to demonstrate a correlation between between A and B, you have to be able to sit down and say, well, one, there's a statistical correlation.
Mm.
Is
Yeah.
the rate of autism different in vaccinated versus unvaccinated children? If the answer is no, then it doesn't do anything. Second of all,
Bob, just
well,
quickly on that note.
Yeah.
So there was a paper that was released on I think it was 630,000 children from the year 2003 up to 2017 that showed the difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated children, and there was no dissimilarity between either rate of autism.
Send that to me, would you? Can you send me the link?
I'll find it and I'll
It's Bob
DM
at Bob.
you through Discord. Oh, no, I'll just DM it. It's only a short paper. It's not.
Yeah, that'll be great. Or send me the link to it. I just want to use it for my research. Now, the other thing that you have to...
You'll find anti-vaxxers will throw that paper out.
Well, they'll throw out anything that doesn't agree with them. That's kind of like arguing with flat earthers and creationists. But the other thing that you have to do is, if you sit down and say, well, I think this is causing that. Okay, great. Tell me how this is causing that. Give me a mechanism of action or a proposed mechanism of action.
Then you would need to see some part of that vaccine triggering something that triggers autism. I mean, that's what you would be looking for.
Well, okay. Well, let's take vaccines and autism. Show me exactly how you think an MMR vaccine will cause autism. Let's start off with the first thing. What causes autism? What is the cause for autism?
Well, right off the bat, I would have to say exactly what you just asked. What causes autism?
Tell me first.
Okay.
Yeah, what causes autism itself? What is the mechanism by which autism develops?
Genetics?
We don't know. So if we don't know exactly how it is caused, how are you going to say something triggered that?
Absolutely. I agree.
I mean, first of all, like with pneumonia, what causes pneumonia? Well, viral and bacterial infections. We can prove that these things cause pneumonia. Okay. Well, what gives you the virus and the bacteria? If you sit down and say, well, this is what I came in contact with. There's a virus here. There's a virus here. I now have pneumonia. You can say that, number one, transmitted the virus to 2, which in turn gave it to you, number 3, and caused your pneumonia, number 4. There's a chain of evidence there, so to say.
Okay.
But if you don't even know what causes pneumonia, I mean, it could have easily been evil spirits. Who the hell knows?
Yeah. Okay, I see exactly what you mean, and that
if you can't tell me what causes a condition, don't tell me something.
And that would be, and that is the biggest hurdle for people that claim vaccines cause autism. They can't.
That's the difference between correlation and causation.
So if someone says they're an anti-vaxxer with an argument, clarifying that aspect right there alone kind of verifies whether or not they understand or not.
Yes.
Okay. I see.
Well, the thing is, I got an email from an anti-vaxxer, about my series on the measles epidemic in Samoa.
Mm-hmm.
And what, I went through it a little bit, and I'm going to go through it some more. But she sent me a 5-page email that outlined everything from Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, just quoting it verbatim. And, every single argument. Well, vaccinations cause cancer. Measles cures cancer. Measles is harmless. Only 400 people die a year of it. This is going to be a project that I'm going to be working on the next couple of months, because I think this is what called me to start a YouTube channel, was so I could talk about vaccinations.
Cool.
And public health.
I'm gonna go ahead
and marijuana. Lots of marijuana.
I'm gonna go ahead and call this one a wraps. I appreciate, man. You have no idea how much I appreciate just the conversation.
Flat Earth is an annoyance.
Yeah,
Flat Earth is dangerous
It's a
for
hobby.
one reason and one reason only, and that it drives a wedge between people and science.
Yep, I 100% agree.
Anti-vaxxers are dangerous.
And I was gonna say,
anti-vaxxers kill people.
When you start doing that more, let me know. And again, I like to have we'll schedule a time or something where it's just me and you, and getting the nitty gritty of explaining things and your view on things, because I don't know anything about vaccinations in that realm. It goes to the point where my son got his first shots, but we didn't get him shots until we got to 5th grade, I think, and he was fine. So in my brain, I don't know. It was more of what do we think is the best thing? Now it was years ago. Now I realize we had no clue to make that decision. So I do want to hear more about it.
They did a study not long ago on that very issue, on vaccine hesitancy, and the reasons for it. And they found, on surveying patients, a very interesting finding, and that is that anti-vaxxers knew more about the vaccines and the conditions that the vaccine treated than the people that got vaccinations. And the problem is their information in most cases was wrong.
Yeah, or they didn't understand what they were reading.
Well, you're harmlessly obtuse when it comes to the deep nitty gritty of public health and vaccinations and virology and everything. So what you do is you'll go to somebody like me that actually was formally trained in this stuff, and you will rely on my opinion. And and that's based on your relationship with me. It's based on your relationship with my receptionist. It's based on whether or not my room is comfortable, and I've treated, and I know the name of your dog. And whether or not I've been right on my other treatment decisions for you in the past.
Yeah.
Now, vaccination hesitancy generally comes from people that don't have that level of trust in their providers, that have other things that are kicking in. Religious, liberty issues, conspiracy theory, natural health. Those are the 4 big ones. But they think, it's the Google School of Medicine.
I want people who want to be anti-vaxxers to come to the Northern Territory and get a dose of Ross River virus and see how long they survive without the vaccination. It's a multi-vector strain that affects the respiratory system.
Yeah.
Wait, do I have to?
And you haven't lived until you've seen somebody die of tetanus.
I have to. I go to Australia, do I have to get shots?
Okay, so Ross,
get a shot for everything.
Virus.
Fuck.
Yeah, but no, basically cover yourself for hepatitis and tetanus. That's basically what they will subscribe.
Look, I don't getting shots.
If you step on a rusty nail in our country, you will die.
Okay, I'll get a shot.
Tetanus.
You convinced me.
There are really, really painful things in the world. Kidney and gallbladder stones, childbirth, sickle cell anemia, pancreatitis, but the worst is tetanus.
Really? Is that real? Damn.
It's a horrible way to die, and you generally do die with it.
But
they
that
had
takes
one
a
kid.
while.
They had one kid that they managed to keep alive, and he required 56 days in the unit, and they had to blindfold him and put earplugs in him to try and keep the spasms down. Any stimulation triggers these total body spasms that bend you backwards like a bow.
Damn.
The only thing that touches the bed is the back of your head and your heels.
Oh shit.
It's a horrible thing. So, and
that's something you take for granted.
Yeah,
that's definitely one you would go. Is that one really important?
Yep. We get it every 5 years.
I don't even remember the last time I got a vaccination from something.
Maybe, if you work in industry,
I had surgery 4 years ago, so they probably gave me something. I don't know. I was on the brink of death, so I'm not really sure. But whatever they pumped into me, I live. So thank you,
guys. I got to go. I got to spend some time with my family, and I haven't gotten a shower yet today.
All right, sir. I appreciate it very, very much again, like I said, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care, my man.
Cheers, Bob.
Take care.
Davidoros, I'm gonna end this, man. I'm hungry. I got the munchies.
That's cool, brother. You can do what you want because you are fighting the fight against the dirt. Okay? And I just want to say, Travis, go fuck yourself.
Yes, Travis. You think you won't talk to me because I'm a liar? Nah. You're just not worth my time anymore. I've said my final say. It's dead. And I've killed Etherband. Now I have killed Travis. Not for real. Like, it's not a threat.
No. We killed the ether.
Yes. We killed the ether band already, and now we just got done killing the ether zombie.
The ether bunny. The ether bunny.
Is that what that is now? The ether. Can he be a zombie though? Ether bunny zombie.
Oh, so he's the zombie ether bunny. I'm sure No Name will attach that very quickly.
Okay. Perfect. I mean, that's exactly what it needs to be. I mean, if you really want to get with it, this is what the problem is Travis is a tulip. He's fragile. You know, fragile? That's Italian for fragile.
Yep.
Yeah. His ego is fragile. So
yeah, it can be broken quite easily just by saying a couple of words. Like, all your shitty photos that are out of focus, learn to take 15 shots in the same frame so you can get the best one.
Erebus, you were there for Jose. I see Erebus in the chat. And I'm sorry, man. I saw you, but I didn't even correlate to say something. Did you see the beginning?
No, I have to watch it. What happened?
Okay. Well, yeah, just watch the first 5 minutes and you'll be so proud. Every single picture that we involved in that conversation with Travis, I showed on the screen at once. I showed all the streams that I dedicated to talking to him about this stupid shit. Yeah, so everything he said, I showed how dishonest he was. But then Dr. Bob came in and saved the fucking stream, and I got to learn some shit and have a great conversation. So I am happy that happened. But yeah, and you do know, the ether band is buried at my cemetery, but I do give you the credit. You killed the ether band. Let's get that for real. Beard Dragon, Erebus, he killed the ether band. I just buried him.
Well, I gave him just enough rope. Enough rope.
Just enough. He didn't want a tippy toe. That's his problem. But,
Gary Wybanger, don't start the fight that you're gonna lose, you dumb fuck.
Oh, that's the other thing. I've also realized that I can actually involve myself in deeper issues, like the one that we were talking about. I would, if I could set up the Dr. Bob Grimm discussion, that'd be fucking awesome. That's the other thing. This would be a good environment for those type of discussions. And you don't have to worry if you're gonna have to like put your left guard up for like a deflection from a it doesn't spin argument. You're like, what? Hang on, I gotta know sci-fi science.
Those science denying fucktards, as I like to call them.
Damn, man. I mean, yeah, but you don't have to say it like that. Davros, you've gotten angry over the past few weeks. I've noticed that.
Yeah, because so I turned a leaf at New Year's, right? And
okay, continue.
I am not gonna hold back, right?
Wait, you've been holding back?
Yeah, man.
Okay, you do understand that you have become a very angry person. Apparently, you're doing it on purpose, and I get it. I get it. I can't do it myself, but I get it. I've decided over like the past 2.5, 30 seconds that I've thought about it. We're going to start doing a Davros therapy session every day.
Nice.
Yep. Not today, though. This is the consultation. We do accept you. We do want you to come into our program, and we will talk to you. We'll have a conversation. We will designate 5 to 10 minutes, 30 seconds to your situation and or questions we have, and we'll move on. But we'll make it a regular thing. I realized you need it.
Yeah,
otherwise
and we'll just
pop.
let it all out.
Yep.
Like you did earlier in the stream. You let it all out.
Wait, were you around when I did? I know Blue was here. There was a short, very small period of time where I did the 1 minute of anything goes. Were you around for that?
I was listening to the YouTube before I jumped into the voice chat, and I was like, Sean, you finally fucking said it.
That's like the perfect thing. I'm gonna do that again, but no. We may do that again, but for now, it's gonna be the Davros 30, and it's gonna be like 30 seconds or 5 minutes worth of Davros therapy time, and everyone can see what it takes to talk down an angry person.
Good luck, because my secret is I'm always fucking triggered.
Oh, and Gary, the peer review that I do on my panel will always be around. Sometimes there just doesn't need to be a peer review. Sometimes things are just what they are. I'm sorry.
Oh, he thinks peer review's written on paper.
That's cute.
He's a fucking idiot.
Yep. All right, now I'm going to get out of here. Blue, thank you for being on, my friend.
I haven't really been doing anything. I walked away for a long time.
Well, it happens. I do that too. But thanks for being here anyway.
Well, yeah. It looks good, you know.
You could have been somewhere else. I mean, like, not you. I meant your avatar.
Yeah. I left the avatar.
It does.
When I can't be here, the avatar will be here.
Perfect. It's all good.
Works good.
All right, sir. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself out of here and say goodbye on the YouTube side. Do appreciate you guys being here anyway. Davros, tomorrow, man. You need to start thinking.
Tomorrow, tomorrow I'm on the shills with the Insatiable Dick Dawson and DKG Custom.
Uh-huh.
So there's going to be six dimensions of dumb fuckery dealt with.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, so check this out. They need to do this, and everyone needs to listen up, and you can suggest I'm going to have an upload that comes out tonight. And this is going to help everyone, because one thing that uploaders do, or better yet, live streams. This is for live streams. If you do a day in advance notification to everyone, reminder saying, hey, I'm going to be live in 12 hours or 24 hours. There's something you can do that makes it so that everyone gets your notification. If you haven't noticed, it's like a slow draw in when you do those long ones. You can do the 24-hour, you can do the 12 and the 1 hour notifications throughout, like at any time. So like everyone will like keep getting your notification that you're going to be live, not just when you're live. Because a lot of people have been running around going, I didn't get a notification. Well, if the streamer does the 12-hour thing, sometimes it doesn't always go out to everyone. So that's what happened. And I'm going to have an upload that shows you exactly how to do that. Even like right now, I can change it to notify for an hour for no reason. But I'll show you guys how to do that in the upload. That's going to be uploaded later on.
Hashtag Terry Davies. Watch this.
Okay.
You know how you put your keywords in?
Yeah.
You need hashtag Terry Davies.
Okay.
Because he needs to fucking watch it. Because
that's exactly why I did it. Because he does the long streams or the long reminders, and I remember going, I didn't get a notification when he went live. It's because if I go there and I fucking click off of it, if I see that notification, then that's the only notification I get from Terry, and unless he goes live. Unless
you've set reminder for that stream, you will not get another notification.
Exactly. So I can the upload will show exactly. You can do the 24 hours, and then you can change it to the 12 when it gets to 12 hours, so it does another notification, and then there's another one that does it at the hour, and then I can even show you how to show it in. I haven't done it yet, but you can every upload, every stream you're part of, if you contribute to it, you can put. I mean, there's so many tricks and things you can do that I know that I want to tell everyone. Every time I see someone trying to figure something out, I'm like, I know how to do it. Just let me tell you. But I'm gonna start getting those out there too, because I have a lot more time now. But with that said, Davros Blue, I am out of here. I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself and get off YouTube.
See you, man.
Yep.
See you, Sean.
So with that said, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and get the hell out of here. It was a fun one. But honestly, I thought it was gonna go live for maybe an hour. It just with my rant about Travis and his BS. But I think I've definitely reburied the Ethernet or the ether band bunny zombie, whatever he said. I don't remember, but that's dead. But again, I do thank Dr. Bob. That was a great conversation that we had. It lasted a long time. And definitely offered a different view to vaccines and how things work, and especially with the cannabis talk and the legalization and the guns and all that kind of stuff and how that works. I'm going to try to get a good conversation where it's just nothing but those topics with him soon as I can, and that should be awesome. Maybe I'll even just see if he wants to do it on his live stream where I just ask him questions, because realistically I just have a lot of questions that I didn't know I was going to be asking. So, it happens. But with that said, guys, I'm going to get the hell out of here. Again, thanks for everyone in the chat that stuck around, everyone that was in the panel. I will see you guys later. Give me 1 second. Okay, now I can say something. All right, so like I said, I'm gonna get the hell out of here, and I will see you guys around. I'm probably going to I'll put the Discord link, the one server and all that stuff that I'm going to be using. I mean, this is the panel I'm going to always use from now on. So if you want to join that, you guys can join. I'll still be able to verify you, so the next stream or just whenever, you can come on through and see if anyone's in there. But yeah, that's exactly how it is. And after that, I'll see you guys tomorrow. With that being said, I'm out. Peace.